Hello, White Sox fans, and welcome to another edition of FutureSox Podcast. My name is Ian Eskridge. Joining me today is James Fox. How you doing, James?
Great, sir. How's it going?
Absolutely wonderful. So it's been ranking season for all of the publications across the internet and major league, websites all over the place. Today, we are lucky enough to be joined by Joe Doyle from FutureSox Series. Let's just go ahead and bring him in right now. How you doing, Joe?
Good, guys. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. We appreciate it. So I guess we'll just go ahead and hop into it. So you are part of FutureSox Series site. You just want to go ahead and tell us about the platform and what it does, and then go ahead and hop into how your guys' ranking system works for the prospects.
Yeah, so FutureSox Series has been around for quite a while now. We are a amateur highlighting company. Like, we want to highlight the amateur athlete. We do showcases, we do tournaments to grow the game, right? And I think over the last couple of years, the site has really tried to expand a little bit into the digital space, start talking a little bit more about amateur prospects in the scouting report public form, as well as minor league prospects, and doing that side of the house. And it's just to grow awareness to the actual brand. But I was brought in about a year ago. I did about 4.5 years with Prospects Live before that. And the goal is to just continue to push out the same quality content as we did, previously.
Awesome. So when you guys go ahead and start doing your minor league ranking stuff, is there a particular point system how you guys develop what your ranking is for each player?
Yeah, I think our system is going to be a little bit different than what you see at Pipeline or Baseball America or Fangraphs. And we could tinker with this a little bit going forward. But what we use is role, and role is a way to define what a player's, for lack of a better word, role is going to be at the next level. It's on the same 20/80 scale that you'll see elsewhere, but instead of using things like ceiling and potential, we want to use a system that is more based around probability. So, for example, if you're a role 40 guy, then you're going to be a backup at the major league level, or a number 5 type of a starter on a middling team. If you're a role 6 or a 60 grade, you're going to be an all-star level talent. And those guys are going to be a lot more rare. But I think in usage, what makes our scale a little bit different is you're going to see a lot more value placed on proximity, and you're going to see more value placed on relievers. And so for that, you're probably going to see guys with big stuff at the upper levels higher on our boards than you would at other places. Or, for example, if there's a first baseman that doesn't project to slug, he's probably not going to be very high on our boards. So really, it's a probability and proximity and most likely case scenario board. So it's going to differ a little bit from what you'll see elsewhere.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So before we get into like the overall system and some of the top guys in it, the White Sox recently made 2 trades. We talked a little bit off air about it. One of them was with your Mariners. For anybody that doesn't know, you're a Seattle guy. That one, I don't know if you loved that side of it for the White Sox, but I do think you've been a fan of Dominic Fletcher in the past. So just your thoughts on both of those moves that the White Sox made.
Well, I mean, I think here's the thing with the trade with Seattle. I actually don't hate it. I think what Seattle got back, assuming Santos stays healthy, is going to probably outweigh what Chicago pulls in. Now, that being said, you're going to see like Prelander Baroa ranked pretty high on the FSS board because he's likely going to be a big leaguer right out of the gate. We have him as a role 45 guy who, for those of you that don't know, role 45 for a reliever is going to be someone that is like a mid-leverage reliever, a 7th inning type of a guy. But we've long written he has the potential to be Gregory Santos. Like, throws 102, 99 to 102 with a big slider. Like, he could be a role 55 guy in no time. I think when I evaluate that trade for Chicago, I think it obviously fully 100% comes down to pick number 69, that comp B pick. Being able to add $1 million to your draft pool for an organization that is resetting or rebuilding, or however you want to characterize it, I think is incredibly important. And it gives guys like Mike Shirley the chance to take the player that they think they best develop, they are most efficient with. So I think Burrow is a great get. I think he could be every bit of the player that Santos is. I think giving up 5 years of Gregory Santos for the idea of Prelander Burrow is a little scary. Zach DeLoach, listen, I was a huge fan of him in 2020 when they drafted him. He was a huge performer on the Cape. He's been essentially the exact same player for 4 years. There's a lot of strikeout concerns. There's impact concerns with the batted ball data. There's swing and miss. I think he's ultimately probably a fourth outfielder, and he could be an up and down guy if he doesn't clean up the swing and miss. He's going to be 25 this year. So that's something to keep in mind. Dom Fletcher is a guy I've been high on since like 2019. I love Dom Fletcher. I don't think he's a high ceiling guy. I like, at best, he's probably Andrew Benintendi, but I comped him to Josh Reddick years and years ago, and that's pretty much what he's turned out to be. Like, he's a below average to fringy runner, but the guy can really, really, really hit. There's sneaky power in there, and he's controllable for 5 or 6 more years now. So I think he immediately slides in to one of the corners. At least they're going to give him every opportunity to be one of the corner guys. It's a shame that Benintendi is already in left field because you pretty much have the carbon copy of him here. But yeah, he's a really good player, and you had to give up a pretty good arm to get him, but also there's enormous reliever risk there as well. So I would make that move 10 out of 10 times if I'm Chicago.
Yeah, and it seems like a lot of like Brian Bannister influence right now, like in Chicago. So my thought is like with Mena there, like they really haven't been able to like improve the fastball, and maybe Arizona does, and the White Sox regret it, right? But like he's in AAA, he's super young. We liked him, but it's kind of like you said, like it's probably a number 4 starter even if he makes it. So taking the need there is good. The other thing that I told you that I thought was interesting, Santos has got big time stuff. It's a great ground ball rate. It's not as many strikeouts as you would think. Brian Bannister has traded this man 3 times now, which is something that I just kind of found interesting. Like I don't know if it means anything, but it's it's like he showed up and saw him and immediately like, nope, we're not doing this time either.
Yeah, I would say this about Santos. Tampa, the Dodgers. I would throw Seattle into that bucket. I just think there are certain clubs that are best fit to really pull the most out of a guy's stuff. And Santos, you're talking about a guy that's, 98 to 101, 102 with a bowling ball sinker that can, break knuckles, and that 90-mile-an-hour slider. It's, I think what's probably going to happen is Seattle's probably going to treat him like they treated Andres Munoz. Like it's going to be 60% sliders, maybe backdoor the sinker and try and figure out a way to command that pitch a little bit better because it's kind of a buckshot, scatter shot sinker all over the place right now. We'll see what it looks like in a year and a half with Santos, because I think they could probably turn him into the 8th inning or 9th inning guy that he should be, regardless of the strikeout concerns. So we'll see.
So you want to move to the overall ranking of what you think the White Sox, how the White Sox kind of slot in amongst the major league clubs, and give us just kind of an idea how you perceive the system from your side of things.
Yeah, so the White Sox, I can say this. I personally don't do minor league team rankings. I think it's a futile experiment. I think there's so many things that can happen over the course of even 3 weeks that can change the way that a farm system looks. But I will say they're one of only 3 organizations that I had with 22 guys with a roll 40 grade, which for those of you that aren't on the page right now, 40 means a big leaguer. Like straight up 40 means that is a big league player. So the fact that organization has 22 guys that I and Jason feel strongly, we feel conviction that they're going to be big leaguers as like a floor, says a lot about the organization. Now, I don't think that the White Sox farm system is in a place of impact right now. I think Colson Montgomery has the chance to be a star. I said that he's going to go to multiple All-Star games with with our grading system. I think he could be a guy that hits 275 with 30 home runs a year once he finally grows in to that frame of his, and starts understanding his swing like I think a lot of people anticipate he's going to, and backspinning the baseball. But so to answer your question, like, I think there's a ton of depth, there's a ton of talent, there's a ton of contributors in this system. I just don't think the system yet has the guys at the top that you need to push a team from a middling, 82, 83, 84 win team to that like 90 win team that requires 5, 6, 7, impact regulars. The system just seems to be missing that right now.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think they're somewhere middle of the pack. Like, it doesn't really matter where you rank them, but I think it was just bigger, like where they came from, because they were in the bottom with Kansas City and the Angels in Houston, like until a bunch of deadline trades and a draft that a lot of people kind of liked. So like the system looks a lot different than it did like at this time last year. So yeah, I agree that it lacks like the premium upside throughout, but the depth is definitely better for the first time in a while. So what I'll ask you then is like your thoughts just overall on the Chris Getz like experience so far. So I will say me and Ian, like I didn't love the hire because I just much prefer you to like go outside and do a search. Right. But what I've said is like, I don't know that necessarily means that Chris Getz is terrible. And it doesn't mean that he's the same as Kenny and Rick just because he worked there. So your thoughts on the hire at the time compared to like now and maybe some of the other guys he's brought in with him.
Yeah, I mean, I think the optics of the hire publicly are always going to be, God, they hired from within. Like, why would you hire from within? This has been it's been an organization that internally has had so much turmoil. I think what people struggle to, first of all, Chris Getz is a great mind. Like he's more cutting edge than anyone that they've had in a long time in Chicago. What I think a lot of people don't understand about the industry is there's so much people speaking over their peers. Like at the end of the day, a lot of times the buck just stops with the guy at the top, and that's the guy making the decisions, and everyone around him is in essence an advisor, right? Like they don't have responsibilities but to advise, and they report up. So I think from a hiring perspective, the optics of it, obviously not what White Sox fans were probably hoping for. But I think now that we are, a decent chunk of time into this, you can kind of see the vision here. Like he's done a lot of good things. He's acquired some really nice players over the last few years. He's built out that farm system, and he's done it without moving the big ammo yet, right? Like I think we would all agree that this farm system is in a much better place. It's like you said, probably middle of the pack. It still needs impact, but you still have Dylan Cease to move at the deadline if things aren't going your way. I think Luis Robert is still a guy that you can entertain moving for, blue chip, a top 10 prospect in the game in July if you need to do that. And I would even say, I think the team could even bolster the organization a bit more in July if they're willing to eat, $18 million of what's left from Yoan Moncada's deal. And let's say he's hitting 260 and he's providing some value. There's a lot of teams out there that could use a third baseman who can play a decent defense, hit 260 and 18 homers, and if they don't have to pay for it. And there's some other guys on that roster too. Like if you're Chicago, you're obviously hoping for an Eloy Jimenez bounce back. You want him to be a viable DH candidate at the trade deadline too. This is all to say he has improved this farm system considerably. He's kind of changed the narrative around the organization considerably. And I personally don't even think he's moved his best assets yet. And waiting until July when there's going to be probably a buyer's rush, it's probably in process the best way to go about this thing. Instead of 2 bidders, maybe you have 8 bidders for Dylan Cease. Pretty good.
One thought I had was, talking about the Yoan Moncada thing is that, you get those guys on World Series teams that are like mid-year pickups that just happen to go on a tear in the last half of the year. And if he's healthy, I don't see any reason why he couldn't do that. And definitely, if they're willing to eat some of that payroll to, bring back some decent prospects for something like that, even with his ridiculous contract as it looks now anyway.
I mean, just look around the league. Like Seattle is primed to play Luis Urias and Josh Rojas at third base. If Moncada's having a good year, you don't think Seattle would be interested in Moncada for the stretch run? You don't think Philly would be interested in having another option to put on a corner infield spot with Rhys Hoskins gone and Bryce Harper now playing first base? Like, there are contenders. We don't know what Boston is going to do. I'm not saying Boston's going to be the best team in the world, but they could surprise some people, and they don't have a great third base option right now. So, well, they have Devers, but they lost Justin Turner. They've got a spot on the corner infield, I should say. I think teams are always looking for a guy that can hit for cheap in his walk year. Like, Moncada, I think, will end up being a better trade asset than a lot of people expect. Now, I don't think Chicago is going to get a whole lot back, because they're going to have to, chew on $16 to $18 million just to make that happen. But so long as the prerogative isn't simply to get money off the books with that deal, I think you could get back another roll 45 type of a reliever and, move him and prepare for the future.
You
want to move on to the system, James?
Yeah, so just, I don't want to get into every guy, but, at the top of this system, so the White Sox have been criticized in the past for kind of being so college heavy and not choosing upside, right? And 2 of the last 3 years in the first round, it's Colson Montgomery and Noah Schultz. They're at the top of your list and pretty much at the top of everyone's. I guess just, some overall thoughts on those 2 guys leading this system and what they can be. I know you kind of talked about Colson a little bit already.
Yeah, I mean, his barrel rates continue to jump. He's continued to when he's healthy, he's continued to look like the plus hitter that I think a lot of people forecast him to be. I still don't think he's getting everything out of his 6'4" frame. I still think he's learning how to backspin the ball and just getting extended time and just play. Like, I just want the guy to stay healthy so he can show off his tools, get to AA, get in, 250 plate appearances, and then go rake in Chicago. So Montgomery is clearly the best shot that Chicago has in this system of producing an all-star, at least from this chair. Schultz is he's just a really interesting arm. Like, it's such good clay. He's, 6'9". I remember when he was getting drafted out of high school, everyone thought, oh, this is going to be a top 10, top 15 pick. He gets mono. He doesn't pitch. Like, he's barely on the mound, and he sneaks into Chicago's lap. James, you and I have talked about the stories behind that pick. They're fascinating, but Chicago loved him from the jump. It's an absolutely unbelievable slider. It's good against lefties. It's good against righties. It's a nightmare against everyone. And I think if he can get a little bit more value out of his fastball, again, this is a guy that hasn't pitched as much as you want to see. It's a big, tall lefty that could be 97 to 98 when he finally grows into himself with the 70 grade breaking ball. And the changeup is usable. That's a number 2 starter in the big leagues. And right now we have him as a roll 55, which I think is fairly aggressive. It's a potential all-star, impact, above average big league regular. And, we are betting on him being at worst a number 3 starter with probably a number 2 starter in his future.
We've talked about this a little bit on the show. Like, I don't even necessarily care, like, if he gets hit around or whatever. It's like all about innings, like, for me. So,
yeah.
He's had like 2 injuries that were mostly minor, but he's missed time. In a healthy season, what do you think is realistic? 75 innings? He pitched 27 last year.
Yeah, that's about what I would aim for. I would shoot for 65 to 80 innings. I don't think you can push him too far. It wouldn't surprise me if Noah is just saved at the complex level until the middle of April, just to, lather his workload a little bit. Make sure that he's fully healthy, make sure that he's loose, and keep him in warm weather so he's not, taking stressful outings out there when in the cold. Like, I would be surprised if he went over 80 innings. And that would set him up for a nice 2025 season where he could be at AA and, he could throw 130 innings. So yeah, that would be about my cap, would be 70 to 80, maybe 85 innings, depending on how strong he's feeling.
So see that you've got Jake Eater in the 3-hole.
Yeah, that's going to be a hot take for a lot of people. Yeah.
Yeah, no, for me personally, like, I had Ramos above both of those pitchers, just personally. But I was within a hair of putting Eater in front of Nastrini because I really like his projectability over what Nastrini does. I think Nastrini will probably be, useful for sure.
Mhm.
I just don't know if he's got the top end, possibilities that Eater has. You want to talk about your thoughts on Jake Eater and, what you see him developing as?
Yeah, so going back to the draft, the stories coming out of Miami when he was selected there were so many organizations that were mad that Miami snuck in and took him, because I think a lot of teams were banking on being able to pull him down the board just a little bit. And immediately when the draft ended, he was like the topic of conversation for like 6 or 7 teams trying to pull him away from Miami, trying to throw him in a trade at the end of August or at the end of July that year. And I still believe in it. Like, he's been up to 98. It's an athletic lefty with a fast arm. The slider wasn't what I think it is going to be last year. It was a lot better in college. It was a lot sharper, but I think it projects a plus slider. And he's got a usable changeup that when it's really good, it's got some parachute and some tail. So I think this is a 3-pitch lefty. Like I said, up to 98. I don't know if it's going to be a plus fastball. I think it's probably going to perform at an above average level. But if you give me an athletic lefty with an above average fastball, with budding velocity, with a plus slider, and a really usable changeup to get righties off of him, I think that has a chance to be a number 3 starter. Now, listen, he got hit around last year. There's no question about that. He got beat up a little bit. But I still think, if you're asking me today, would I rather have Jake Eater or Nick Nastrini or Peyton Pallette or Jonathan Cannon? I would take Eater all day, because I think he's got the upside. I think he's still building back arm strength. I think he's getting his endurance back. I think he's figuring a way to really kind of get back what he had in college and early there. So, I think this is the best pitching prospect outside of Noah Schultz in the organization, and I think he's probably going to make his debut this year.
So did you like that trade at last year's deadline then?
I loved it.
Yeah,
I told you.
I remember,
when it
like,
happened. Yeah,
there
I
were
told you when
there
it
were a lot
happened.
of Sox fans that hated it. Then I right away liked
many.
it. So yeah,
So many.
I loved that deal. I think I texted you right when it happened. I said, this is exactly the type of deal that Chicago needs to be doing. They were so stationary at that point with Sheets and with Jimenez and Moncada and Berger and Vaughn, and like, it was the most stationary team, the most DH heavy team that was getting next to nothing in terms of value on the bases. And for me, Jake Berger was like house money. Like, this is a guy that, popped his knees and popped his ankles like 3 times since he was drafted. And yeah, like, he finally came onto the scene and he did perform in Miami, but you can only carry so many of those guys on one team. And the idea and whoever thought Jake Berger could play third base, that was, we'll see if he plays any third base in Miami, but that's not a good look for him. You can't carry Andrew Vaughn and Jake Berger and Eloy Jimenez on the same roster. So being able to flip him, who he's been porcelain, for a guy with Eater's upside, that's the type of deal that Chicago needs to be making 100 times out of 100, especially in the window that they're currently in.
Yeah, so next I want to skip over a bunch of guys and take you to last year's draft. Obviously, Jacob Gonzalez was pretty controversial. The second pick was really interesting, though, and nobody knew who this guy was. And again, right away, like, I kind of heard from you and some others that either saw him or heard just how loud it was, early before he went down. So, your thoughts on Grant Taylor, and then what that maybe looks like this year, because I have some questions on that too.
Yeah, I don't know if he's going to pitch this year. I would be actually kind of surprised if he does pitch this year, but I'm fairly certain that I was the high man on Grant Taylor in the draft. I had him at 59. So, I mean, a lot of people were like, this guy's going to go back to school, or he's going to be a 4th round pick and someone's going to throw him $1 million. Like, I had him at 59. Like, I had him a day one guy. I had his bullpen TrackMan data. Like, pardon my French, his shit was insane. Like, the best stuff outside of Paul Skeens in that program, bar none, not even close. And you're talking about a guy that's big and strong, and it's a reasonably easy operation. It's a shame that he popped, because I think he would have been a 1st round pick if he didn't. But he'll be 3 to 4. He'll touch 97, 98. There's a 2-seam, there's a cutter, there's a 4-seam. He'll keep hitters off balance. And then there's the slider, there's the curveball. But I had scouts telling me in February, like, or March, I don't remember what it was. It was leading up to the season, but they were like, this is like the guy. I had teams, organizations coming to me saying, if he's there, it's probably going to be our pick. I won't say who, but, and he was loud on the Cape. Like, Grant Taylor was weeks away from showcasing what could have been like top 20 pick stuff, and it's a shame that he got hurt. I thought this was a great pick by the White Sox. I think it's the kind of risk that you take. It's the same thing that they did with Peyton Pallette. And yeah, I think he could be, I don't have him, like, I'm not going to be super aggressive with a guy that just popped. I'm going to give him a roll 45, which says he's a big leaguer, a potential starter. But I think he could end up being like a number 2 starter. Like, he could be what Cade Horton turned into over that like 8-week stretch for Oklahoma. I think that's what would have happened with Grant Taylor. I think he would have shot up boards too. So it was a steal.
So I figured we'd move to the 11 through 30 area. Do you want to you have any overall thoughts on, I mean, I know that we've talked about the fact that they've got like 22 guys that you've got in that useful major league role. Are there some guys that, are there any of these guys in the bottom 20 here that you've got your eye on in particular?
I mean, I think everyone's talking about Matthias Lacombe. I think he's probably going to be the guy that everyone watches this year with binoculars, because I mean, that's pretty impressive stuff. I don't know much about him. I really got turned on to him with like 2 months to go before the draft actually came along. I haven't seen him, but the reports that I've seen, other people have written him up. I've watched a little bit of film. He's very interesting. I think Christian Opor is that's the draft and sign type of a kid that it's a super athletic delivery from the left side. I think he was up to 96 or 97 with a good breaking ball. I generally really like to buy into guys that are really good movers on the mound. It was the same conversation with Ricky Tiedemann. It was the same conversation with trying to remember the left-handed pitcher that the Yankees took in the 3rd round out of San Diego, I think it was. I can't remember his name now, but it might come to me. Generally, those guys that are really good movers and get into an organization that develop pitchers well, which I'm not saying that's Chicago yet, but they're moving in the right direction. They're usually guys that pop. Like they generally move up boards pretty quickly with loud performances. The guy that I really like, I don't know if he's got the highest ceiling, and I think it's representative of his number 40 role here, is Seth Keener. Like, there are things about Seth Keener that it's easy to fall in love with. Like, he's a huge frame kid. It's elite extension. It's a fastball up to 96 or 97. He'll live 93 to 94 into later innings. I think the slider and the changeup both need work. They both need to tighten up a bit, maybe get a little bit more firm. It's probably just 2 average secondaries, but that's a kid that was playing for the best program in the country amongst a ton of very, very good arms and was performing with the best of them. He had to scratch his way into Tuesday starts because Sullivan and Lauder and all those other guys were taking the spotlight. So I think he could be a steal from that class. And I think the biggest narrative for me with this farm system as a whole is, you look at Lacombe, you look at Opor, McDougal's healthy now, and the reports have been good there. Keener, I like Sean Burke if he can stay healthy. Cannon, like, there are so many arms that Chicago has right now developing that if just 2 of these guys can take a step forward, you might be able to build out an entire rotation in 2025 with controllable young starters. And that's how you build a competitive window.
Yeah. You got any thoughts, James?
No, I think he hit that. I know, you wanted to get into, I think we just had like an overall question for you. And I don't know if you can, I don't want you to speak for other people that do what you do. Right. But we're like a little perplexed by Braden Shoemake, like, overall. And like the White Sox 40 man right now, there's guys that maybe could be easily discarded. But I don't think they want to lose Lenyn Sosa, Jose Rodriguez, like those types for nothing, right? Because like they're on the 40. Shoemake is also on the 40. They have infielders in big league camp that they might have to add to the 40. So just like sorting this whole thing out, you know, you have Braden Shoemake as a future 40 at 21. Others have him ranked in the top 32. He's never really hit like since being drafted. What are your just like, you know, overall thoughts on him, and then maybe that potential log jam of kind of the same type of guys?
Well, it's all the glove, and that's why, you know, a role can come in a couple of different ways. Like you look at a guy like Brendan Ryan, who made an entire career for himself hitting 215, 220 with exceptional glove work. That's kind of where we're at with Shoemake. Like that's the definition of why he's at 21 on the board. I would not look at Braden Shoemake as the future shortstop of the Chicago White Sox, but I would look at Braden Shoemake as potentially the 26th guy on the roster, and the glove that is coming off the bench in the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th inning to play shortstop, or doing some pinch running, or, you know, batting 9th in a spot start at second or third, or shortstop, of course. But yeah, I think role can come in a number of different ways, and for Shoemake, it's the defensive value. And, you know, I think some people are still curious about the bat. There's still some traits and some tools there that you'd like to see, you know, blossom at the higher levels of the minors or in the big leagues. But I think most of his value is going to come by way of the leather.
So, and I can't have you on and not talk about the draft at least a little bit. So, the White Sox are picking 5. We've talked about just because they're picking 5, what that means for next year, and it's not great. But, you know, we can just talk about them picking 5. I recently did our first mock draft. That's way too early, and I gave him Connor Griffin. Just your overall super early strengths of this class, and then what makes sense for them, like early.
Yeah, it's a good year for, well, it's a weird year for college bats. Like it's a good year for college bats to perform. It's not necessarily a good year for dynamic college bats. Like you're not going to find a lot of guys that are super athletes and can play up the middle of the field. There's a lot of second basemen, first basemen, corner outfielders, things like that. There's no stud shortstop. There's no stud center fielder. There are guys that we think could be that. You know, there are the Seaver Kings. They are the Vance Honeycutts, and of course the Connor Griffins. I think what will probably end up happening, and it's a decent year in terms of depth for college pitching. I think what will end up happening is, if I'm reading the tea leaves and I'm just projecting out 5 months, I don't think Connor Griffin's going to be there at 5. I tend to think, given the low ceiling of some of the guys in this draft, that a team ahead of Chicago will probably take Connor Griffin in the hopes that, you know, he's one of the few guys in this class that has star upside. I don't think Chicago would go for Nick Kurtz. It just seems like, you know, they've been down that road before. Why do it again? And I think Charlie Condon probably falls in the same bucket, despite playing the outfield. I could be wrong there. You know, I think in a perfect world, Chicago would probably like to see Bazzana or JJ Weatherholt fall into their lap. And then as I, you know, look past that, I think Chase Burns is a very, very real option. You know, there are teams at the top, like in front of Chicago, that are always going to be reluctant to take a pitcher in the top 4 picks. There's just not as much value that can be pulled out of a pitcher. So if I'm forecasting out, my best guess today would be Seaver King or Vance Honeycutt, with Vance Honeycutt probably having the edge if he stays healthy. He's looked good here early in the first 2 or 3 games of the season. It's impossible to know what his final line is going to look like, but he's always had the impact tools to, you know, play a plus center field, to, you know, hit 25 homers at the next level and be a 245 to 260 hitter. And in this class, you know, getting a guy that can hit 255 at the big leagues with 25 homers and play an exceptional center field may be the best course of action. So, you know, that would be my guess, especially knowing Chris Getz. Like, I think it's probably going to be an impact starting pitcher if one exists, or try and find something that plays up the middle that can provide exceptional value.
Yeah, we both yesterday, I think, were tweeting out video of Chase Burns pitching. He looked pretty phenomenal.
Yeah, he's a pretty special talent.
I do agree, though, that like the White Sox aren't going to be one of the teams that's afraid to take the first pitcher. Like if he's the, like
I agree.
there are some teams in front of them that are just going to go bat no matter what. They won't be afraid to take a pitcher there. Now, the thing that it doesn't really scare me because I like believe in Mike Shirley, but I see 4 first basemen that are like some of the best guys in this class. And I'm just like not interested in that with Kurtz and even Caglianone. Like if he's not a 2-way guy, like he's probably at first, right? And everybody loves Tommy White. He's not staying at third. So yeah, you're right. Like it's a lot of like bats that I think fans would like be interested in, but it's first and second base for like a lot of these guys, which isn't great.
Yeah, it's not big names. Yeah, exactly. It's like the household names. It's the nickname guys. Like it's not from a scouting perspective, it's not a sexy class. It's like it's an efficient class. It's guys that are gonna do some hitting and not provide a ton of value elsewhere. Like, listen, if JJ Weatherholt or Travis Bazana are there at 5, and trust me, they could be there at 5, just because they've been plastered over the top of everybody's board for the last 6 months means absolutely nothing. They're not. This is all due respect to those guys. Like they're not generational types of prospects. If they are there at 5, I think they make a lot of sense. They can run, they can slug a little bit. They're pretty good hitters. They can play up the middle. They can play second base. Weatherholt might be able to play a very average shortstop. If one of those guys is there at 5, I think that makes a ton of sense for the White Sox organization, not only for taking the best player available, but also taking need. But to your point, James, like if you look at the way Chris Getz has handled this offseason and the way that they've bolstered the farm system over the last 9 months, it wouldn't surprise me at all if they went with Chase Burns, just because you can never have enough pitching. And we talked about all these arms that they have in the system. I said there's a ton of number 4 starters here, a ton of them. Chase Burns is not that. Chase Burns might be an ace, and that's one thing that the system is currently like. Like Chase Burns is a better prospect right now than Noah Schultz, if you ask me, on February 18th. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah. So, I mean, speaking of power stuff, and we've kind of talked about this a little bit, obviously big time command issues, but like how many teams would discard like Brody Brecht's command issues just to get the 2+ pitches and just think that they can figure out the rest of it?
I think I'm actually putting out an article kind of about that tomorrow, wrapping up week 1. I think most teams would probably discard him, at least in the top 15 picks. Like I went back to the year 2017 and I looked at the highest walk rate for a player that was drafted. Brody Brecht, now this is his 2023. Brody Brecht had almost a 20% walk rate last year, which is like outlandishly high. The next highest that you can find is Shane McClanahan, who was at 14, and he didn't go until 34. And then Hurston Waldrop kind of bucked the trend last year as the only other player to get drafted in the first round with a walk rate over 12%. And that was like 12.4%. So, and some people thought that the Braves overdrafted him where they drafted him. He was a very, very polarizing name. So I think the one thing that McClanahan and Waldrop have in common is they have outlier stuff. Outlier stuff. Like McClanahan was 99 from the left side at South Florida. We all know what Hurston Waldrop can do and has done in the low minors. It's probably, if nothing changed and Brecht got his walk rate down into the 15% range, 14% range. He had 6 walks this past week. I think Brecht probably goes in the 15 to 25 range. It is the best stuff that I've ever seen from a college pitcher, but he's going to disqualify himself from, I think, the top 10 or 12 picks with reliever risk like that.
Ian, do you have anything else for Joe? I'm going to close with a more general draft room question that we discussed, but if you have any more questions on the class, go ahead.
Not so much. I kind of share the same feelings. It's just a bunch of first basemen. So I'd be fine with taking a power, big time power arm. If nothing really presents itself to push forward in the prep class. And, if Griffin's not there at that point and he has pushed himself, into top 4, all power to him. And, we won't see him here, but, no general questions. Move on, I suppose.
So, I've always heard a lot about the White Sox and how dysfunctional it is. And I don't want to get you in trouble, but, we always hear the stories about the scouting staff, like having all their meetings and their board. And then, like a decision maker, like a Rick Hahn or Ken Williams just comes in and and makes the decision. I guess like how common is that like across the sport that you know of? And then just anything specifically like White Sox related where Kenny walks in a room and just takes a guy like after the scouting staff did all this work.
So yeah, I don't want to get in trouble. But I will say, speaking from a 10,000 foot view, just from an industry macro, there are a lot of general managers who step in and just make the call. You know, the scouting director and their cross checkers will bring the list of names. Hey, this is who we want to go with. This is what, you know, our scouts like. This is what our model likes. And then the general manager will just make the pick. They'll decide who they want. In fact, I interviewed Jerry DiPoto last year. We sat down for about an hour and we were talking about that. And he said one of the biggest mistakes that he made early in his general management career was thinking he knew everything and not delegating power out to those who do this for 12 months out of the year. And he has not really been, he's signed off on guys that Scott Hunter selects in Seattle, but he hasn't been involved in the actual, pressing the green button, for example. So I think it's a lot more common than you think. And I think it's not even so much an issue with who the White Sox take as much as they just haven't been able to develop who they have taken. They've landed some good talents. Garrett Crochet has been a disaster in the way that he's been handled. You know, Jacob Gonzalez, I think, the alarm bells are ringing because of the swing and where he was taken, but he was one of the best hitters in college baseball for 3 years. I have no doubt that he's going to be able to figure it out, but that comes down to player development. You could have told most people on the day of the draft, if Jacob Gonzalez fell to where he did, that'd be a pretty big steal. Same with like Kyle Teal. He fell. That was a pretty big steal. So it really comes down to organizational messaging. It comes down to cross-department, cross-functional collaboration. And I don't know if Chicago is quite there yet on the cutting edge of the bleeding edge of making sure that message lines are clear across the organization. I have spoken with Mike Shirley. I've spoken with some people in the White Sox organization. They're good people. They know what they're doing. And now it's just a matter of, tying up loose ends. I'll just put it that way.
Got any further questions, James? All right. Well, we appreciate your time, Joe, very much. Enjoy the list. Thank you so much. Do you want to tell people where they can find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Joe Doyle MILB. You can find all my work at FutureStarSeries.com. And if you are really into the draft, I do a weekly podcast with directors and GMs and scouts that come on and talk about the draft and certain players called Overslot. So, thank you for having me, guys.
Thank you. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time, Joe. Thank you for hanging out for this episode of FutureSox. You can find this available on YouTube. You can find it anywhere you get your podcasts, FutureSox.net. You can find all of our published content, including all of the articles and such. My name is Ian Eskridge at Daily White Sox. He is James Fox at JamesFox917. If you happen to make your way over to our site, you can support us on Patreon, which we would appreciate. And otherwise, you guys have a great time. We appreciate your time, and please come and visit us again. Thank you.